Okay.
David, great to see you. And I know you've been super busy, so thank you for giving me a bit of time. I
No
want to
problem.
kick off. I want to kick off with something that some of your colleagues might find a little bit challenging. In your world, lots of businesses want chunks of government support.
Yeah.
You're not that keen on that, which will probably drive some of your competitor CEOs right up the wall. So why don't you tell me why you're not that keen on chunks of government support? I mean, just tell us about that.
Yeah. So I think fundamentally, we are in a highly regulated sector,
Yep.
energy, power, and it tends to be dominated by incumbents and, in
Mm.
some instances, monopolies that were originally state founded, etc. And in order to break into a market and as a new market sets up, etc., a lot of the new participants in that market seek to have generous government support. So whether it's feed-in tariffs, whether it was state-sponsored auctions, etc., we kind of push against that because anything that's over generous is not going to be sustainable long term. It won't get popular or public support. So we seek to ultimately deliver the lowest cost of electricity to consumers. And we really like competitive auctions, and that drives the price down. But the style of those auctions should be such that it attracts the lowest cost of capital. So our biggest dial mover
Yep.
is the lowest cost of capital. And to attract in that lowest cost of capital, we need to remove uncertainty. And if returns are over generous, um, they are uncertain. They will be exposed to regulatory or political risk. They will change. If it's too good to be true, I'm telling you, it's not going to be around for too long, right?
Yeah, no, I'm sure you're right about that. I'm sure you're right.
So we've been involved in founding a lot of trade bodies in numerous markets across Europe, Bulgaria, the UK, Ireland, the European AFASA group, etc. And we lobby very hard for competitive auctions that are kind of contracts for difference auctions. So UK is a perfect example where I think they've got it right. So the UK would go out in a contract for difference. So basically, you're asking the consumer to underwrite the minimum price. Well, if you're asking the consumer to underwrite the minimum price, you should be paying back to the consumer the upside over and above that.
Yeah, yeah.
And Ireland have adopted CFDs as well, contracts for difference auctions. I think this is great because it gives certainty to a developer to a large degree. It tracks in that low cost, risk adverse capital, and that pushes the price down that you bid into the auctions. So most serious bidders in markets will have a minimum IRR hurdle rate, and that's all they need to achieve. And if they achieve that, they'll be successful in the auction and they'll build out their projects. That's going to deliver really low cost capital ultimately to the consumer. If the consumer sees that renewable energy is driving down the wholesale price of electricity and driving down their electricity bills in the real term, they will see that.
Yeah.
And if they see that, they're going to be supportive of it. So not only will you get popular support, but you get political support from, and it doesn't matter whether it's government or in opposition, folks will be supportive of that. I think we're seeing a lot of we've seen huge tax breaks for and incentives and government grant aid, etc., for traditional thermal energy. We had saw lots of supports for renewable energy. Those days are gone now. Now you don't see feed-in tariffs. You see renewable energy bidding in lowest price possible. So the market beats itself up. That's what we like to see.
Yeah, and that's what creates sustainable markets, isn't it? Let me just take you one step back. I mean, I know you've been in this business for a few years, or about 20 years, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
Tell me, I mean, most CEOs that I talk to tell me that, building particularly a global business is a bit of a roller coaster. You know, there are good days, there are days that aren't so good. I mean, what is it about what you're doing that gets you out of bed every day to kind of ride that roller coaster? I mean, tell us about your motivation.
So I think for me, the primary motivation and that of all of the team is that we're decarbonizing the electrical system and the power grid. And that impact is real. And when we deploy a project onto the network, we know we're taking X amount of CO2 out of the system for 40 years. Every time we plug a megawatt in the ground, it's got a 40-year life. That's really impactful. And that's making a difference. And you know, you have to be able to make a profit because otherwise nobody's going to invest in
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But ultimately, that's what drives us is the impact that we make. And we also like to do that by adopting best practice. So this comes back to where we look at market design, et cetera, delivering the lowest cost of electricity, or LCOE, lowest levelized cost of electricity. But it's also best practice with large scale solar and permitting, best practice with working with agriculture and agrivoltaics, working with the communities. We've enhanced biodiversity in every single project we've built. We've engaged with the community in most instances really positively. We're seeing more and more community resistance to projects as they become more evident. So, you know, I think ultimately, though, if you deliver good projects at a good price to a consumer, you know, you'll get that support across the communities and across the sort of public perception will improve as
Sure.
well.
Sure.
I'm not one that believes in cramming in as many solar panels as you possibly can into pristine wild areas or you know really good agricultural grade land. I believe in the best use for that land, and that could be a combination of solar batteries and agriculture or biodiversity. So, you know, the dual use of the land as well, that's something that motivates us. So it's not just having that impact, but also every step of the way,
Yeah.
having those more incremental positive impacts as well as the long-term
Sure.
goal, decarbonizing.
And one of the things that's always struck me when we've spoken is your thinking about how to move the business forward is very clear. Certainly, it
Yep.
seems clear to me. I mean, one of the things that I think is really interesting about the job of the CEO is that it's your job to kind of work out the way forward, to kind of, cut through the noise and get to the right answer, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. I mean, what's your take on the best way of doing that? I mean, how do you do that? Because your world is changing pretty rapidly, particularly in places like the US, isn't it? I mean, what's
Yeah.
your take on that process of cutting through the noise?
It's really frustrating because there is so much static and there is so much noise, but it's the fundamentals in a particular market for a particular technology, for instance, right? So there's a couple of key things, you know, that are always going to be needed. You're always going to need water. You're always going to need food,
Mm.
shelter, energy, and energy being one of them. What is the cheapest form of energy? So with the least impact. Cheapest form with no impact or the least impact is solar PV and batteries, for instance, right? So the fundamental market fundamentals are really, really important, and it's not to lose sight of that. So if I looked at the trajectory of capex on a megawatt in the last decade, we're building projects at 10% of the cost we did a decade ago, right? So we're building projects at less than 500,000 a megawatt, as where 11 years ago we were building that project at 5 million a megawatt or more. So that fundamental is really important. I think demand is growing as well. So people are consuming more and more electricity and they're weaning themselves off thermal fuels, whether it be coal, whether it be oil, gas, etc. So it's the electrification of everything. So we got demand going up and we got capex going down and efficiencies improving. cut through all the policy, all the politics, and it's become very, very political. There's a fundamental requirement for power and in particular energy, and in particular electricity, and in particular the lowest cost form of that generation. So really, it's not to lose sight of those fundamentals in our sector that are really important. And they're all trending in a direction that says we should be doing more of this, not less of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And I mean, you've been riding that roller coaster for quite a long time, haven't you? I mean, has anything happened over the years that's really surprised you that was really unexpected?
You kind of you prepare for the worst. You aim for the best, but you prepare really to get sideswiped. So I think the U.S. administration
Mm.
recently has done everything to challenge renewables and really shut it down. Whether it's in the tax incentives, which, by the way, we wouldn't have been, a huge lobbyist for either. Whether it's permitting and federal lands, whether it's, tariffs on the product and the equipment. It's we've seen raft and wave of legislative measures, either through the Senate and Congress or through executive orders that have really sought to shut down the sector. That's been really challenging.
Mm.
I think there's an overlying trend which has been really interesting that we've seen as well, and that's one more near term sort of change. So we've had to pivot and pivot pretty rapidly. I think the other one that's been more of a trend has been traditionally for 10 or 15 years in this sector, we saw reducing capex, reducing opex, reducing our very historically low cost of capital, like really low cost of capital. And since COVID, we've seen supply chain constraint, we've seen capex increases, we've seen inflation, we've seen interest rate rises. And what that as effect is there's been a move of capital away from the sector
Mm.
back into government yielding bonds, etc. There's been also a lot of projects that were previously marginal are being wiped out completely.
Mm.
That's probably a good thing. I know it's a challenging thing, but having unsustainable low cost of capital for so long
Yeah.
has meant lots of complacency. So I think what you're seeing now is a real move to consolidate the industry in different markets. You're having fewer and fewer players, some getting wiped out, there's winners and losers. We're seeing the same thing with the manufacturers at scale. They have scaled back because there was so much overproduction in the last year, compensating for underproduction. It tends to, it's a pendulum swing. So some of that has been unforeseen to the extent that we've seen it. But they do call the industry the solar coaster for a reason.
Yeah.
And that is because it is such a young industry. It is so subject to geopolitics and macroeconomics that, a blip in the radar screen in interest rates, movement in thermal, whether it's oil or gas prices, has a huge impact on us. We're affected by everything.
Mm.
And usually the market takes, a few months to react. But ultimately, we're kind of used to uncertainty, to be honest, Paul. We've had so much of it over the years. I think how we position for that is we're across multiple jurisdictions.
Mm.
So how BNRG mitigates against those uncertainties and those quite radical changes in policy
Mm.
is by being in multiple markets at any one time. So we're currently active in the US, Canada, the UK, Ireland, Australia, etc. And that enables us to ride out the speed
Sure.
bumps in some markets.
Sure. Let me pick up that point. I mean, the fact that there is so much change must have, I mean, it makes communicating with stakeholders difficult. There's a lot of uncertainty and so on.
Yep.
What's your take on managing the kind of communications with stakeholders in that environment that is changing so much?
It's really challenging. Very few of them quite get it. It's to stay ahead of the curve and get ahead of that narrative is a challenge, but it's very much a case of reminding stakeholders what the fundamentals are and coming right back to basics here and look at your demand and look at your supply. Where do you think the supply is going to come from? Who's going to be able to deliver it in the time frame that we have? And it's a case of let there be no panic. Here's where this is going to map out over the next 2 years. And if this, I regularly map decision trees on a big whiteboard. If this happens, we go this direction. If this happens, we go this direction.
Right.
This happens, we go this direction. There is always a roadmap because the end goal hasn't actually changed.
Sure,
It
sure.
is it's a deferral of the inevitable, right? And that's what it always is in this space when the fundamentals are so strong. It's just how you're going to get there and when you're going to get there and at what cost you're going to get there. They'll all change.
Sure. And have you, I mean, I totally get that. Have you had any particular kind of communications failures that have created headaches for you?
Yeah, I think the challenge has been, some investors struggle when they see rapid changes in a market. Um, and despite getting ahead of that, predicting some of the changes, because you can often see these changes occur and legislating for those changes. Um, there's also a kind of, to a certain degree, a herd mentality. So there's safety in numbers. So if everybody's pulling out of the US, we're going to pull out of the US. When in fact is loads of people are pulling out in the US, but the guys that are in the middle of it, the IPPs, the utilities, the very experienced US developers that are well funded, they're doubling down. There's a reason for that because there's blood on the tracks. But they see the roadmap over the next 18 months to 2 years. So sometimes we've failed to communicate that roadmap to some sort of investors. And I think it's understandable the position of investors as well, because, unless they're really in the weeds, unless they get it, unless they're in it, it's a big leap of faith to a degree. So they have to kind of roll up their sleeves, get stuck in, and really understand the market dynamics to get comfortable.
Yeah. And I guess it's also about making sure that people keep the faith, isn't it? As it were. Now, on that specific point about kind of keeping people pointing in the right direction, I mean, like a lot of people I speak to, you've got a relatively small team, but you're trying to have a
Yep.
fairly big global impact. I mean, what's your take on the kind of people part of delivery? I mean, how do you get the right people on the bus, for example? I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
It's not easy. It's not easy finding the right people, but when you do, it's not difficult getting them on the bus because if they share your vision, they're
Yeah,
with you.
yeah,
And often you get the right people on the bus. Sometimes the wrong people on the bus, and you have to open the exit door and let them go. Because you have to have the right team, and it only takes two or three to upset that apple cart, that dynamic. They may not always be sitting in the right seat, but once they're on the bus, they will be contributing, and eventually they'll find the right seat to sit on.
mm,
So it's about enabling them as well to find their space, the seat, the right seat for them on the bus. You can often spot somebody that you want on that bus journey with you, and you're going to take them along, and we'll find a slot for you. And that's really important. I think it's for a lot of folks, it is, I guess, it's buying into that vision and believing in that vision and seeing that path, and you do it collectively. You're in it together. You're hauling each other over the next ridge for the mountain and then the next one, and you're kind of in it together. The sense of achievement of the collective is just far greater than the individual. Being able to share that heavy lift with others
Mm.
is huge, and it's very empowering, particularly for younger ones that have less experience, coming along, and they have, this drive and this energy that's untapped. And it's been able to point that in the right direction and let it go, and they'll make mistakes. I mean, some of them make pretty pretty obvious mistakes from the outset. They come and say, "Oh, really sorry, I screwed up. I did you? Well, okay, you won't do that again, will you? But you recognize it yourself. There's accountability is really important. But having them when they've screwed up, not sending a circular of cover my ass emails, but actually walking into your office and saying, I'm really sorry, I screwed up. And it's like, okay, well, I did that once. Don't worry about it. Just don't do it again. And that accountability is really important, and giving them enough kind of leash to let them go and make mistakes.
Sure, sure. Let me just turn to the kind of broader process of business building. I mean, what would you say? What are the particular capabilities that you have that give you an edge over your competitors? I mean, what is it that you do in particular that is different and that is enabling you to grow so quickly?
I would say it boils down to two elements. One is we're very technology driven. So we very much pursue what's coming next. So we'll design a project on the basis of a technology that's not commercially available today. And like, I attend chemistry conferences, physics conferences, and there's guys looking at me, chemists, wondering what the hell is your man doing here? He's a developer. And I'm the only one in the room, but I get a sense of the direction of travel and the trend, where the R&D departments and the various manufacturers are really focused. And you start seeing a trend, and then you get to start being one of the early um, folks that see the data starting to come out from the labs. So you can, and this industry moves really quickly.
Mm.
So, like, the first modules that we deployed were, 180-watt modules, were, 120-watt modules. We now deploy 70-watt modules, 700-watt modules, right? We use bifacial monoperc with sort of heterojunction cells, etc. Unheard of even, 3, 5 years ago.
Mm.
So now I'm looking at new technologies, new coatings, Perscovite mixed with tandem cells, with polysilicon, etc. We're looking at different types of battery technology. So it takes 3 to 5 years to develop a project. So the kit that's available commercially today, there will be something that has taken it. It's the next generation has taken over. So it's identifying what that will be. So what that does for us is it opens up new markets. So we were the first international developer in Bulgaria, the first that had ever built projects in the UK, the first in Ireland, one of the first in Maine. I think we were the first in the northeast of the US, developing project, and New Brunswick, in regions that just don't make commercial sense today. But I know the technology I deploy in 5 years' time, they will.
Yeah.
So that gives us an advantage, and we're able to secure grid capacity, which is the finite resource we have in any one location. So that's the first thing, technology, very, very important. The second thing is being in the room when policy has been formed. So we are founding members of multiple trade bodies, particularly in those new markets. And we sit down with policymakers and we say, you're a late mover to this space, but that gives you huge advantage because you can learn from others' mistakes. And that late mover advantage means you can design your policy and your framework. You can cherry pick from the best EU member states that have failed and got it wrong, and here's where they got it right. Cherry pick the good stuff, right? And you can be reinformed in, if you're shaping policy and involved in shaping policy on behalf of industry, you can inform that direction of travel. By the same token, if clearly there is a flow of tide against you, as there was in Eastern Europe for a while, we were able to exit the market long before there was any issue. 6 months later, they brought in retroactive taxes on grid interconnections. So it's getting a sense for the mood music of policy, the direction of travel, the politics of this space, understanding what's coming next, what could happen in a general direction or general election in the UK in 3 years' time, for instance. It could be a very radical different world in the UK than it is today for renewables.
Yeah, I mean, it's
So they're
interesting.
the two areas,
Yeah.
finger on the pulse of policy and then also technology.
I mean, it's interesting that the way you say that, because on one hand, you're saying we will take risks by making a bet that this technology will be relevant in 3 years' time.
Yep,
But equally, you're reducing the risk by working with policymakers to shape the agenda. So
yep.
I mean, what you've described to me is it's almost a kind of a risk balancing, a risk management strategy, if that makes sense.
All about risk management.
Yeah.
All about risk management. And it's assessing those risks, weighing them up and following a direction. But the other thing is we do to mitigate against that risk that I mentioned earlier is a number of jurisdictions. So since we founded the business, I've been insistent we've always been in 3 markets at any one time because it's a highly regulated industry. Because as an independent power producer, you're effectively a new entrant. You're small, you got to be nimble. You're coming in and competing against utilities. That's not easy. So you have to be prepared for policy change that goes against you, or just market forces where he with the biggest balance sheet's going to win out because it's a case of just
Yeah.
putting down big bets on grid interconnection deposits, and you can't compete with that. So
Yeah.
you've got to be able to pivot.
I guess it's kind of conventional theory, isn't it? If you're small, you've got to be agile.
Yeah,
You know.
no question.
Let me ask you about customers. I mean, what does a good customer look like to you in that world?
Reliable, right? So I think what customers want. So for us, it's our off takers for our power, our utilities, our large corporates. So we're not a retail business, so we don't sell power retail. We have done in the US in community solar schemes, but generally speaking, it's utilities and large corporates. We've seen flexibility from them, which is good, and that's a good customer. Where there's been a market shift, like a fundamental change, whether it's tariffs introduced or whatever, and they recognize that actually nobody's going to be able to supply power at this price point. So we appreciate this is a kind of force majeure scenario, even though it's not specifically called out. So we'll sit down with you and recast the agreement so that it works. So it's that communication, a little bit of give and take and being reasonable.
Let me ask you about that. I mean, it's interesting you say you want to be in at least 3 markets at any one time. How have you managed the kind of cultural differences of those markets? I mean, doing business in New York, very different from doing business in, I don't know, Romania. I mean, how do you manage those kind of cultural nuances of
Yeah,
working in
and
different?
they are radically different,
Hmm.
like radically different. So first of all, I'm Irish, and BNRG being an Irish business actually helps.
Because
So with all due respect to a lot of our neighbours and friends, we never really invaded anybody, so we never pissed anybody off, right, to start
okay.
with. So we've come from a very low base, right? So we were never that colonial baggage we didn't have to deal with. We often worked within states that were being built, and we built roads across the globe, etc. So, the Irish have a long history and track record of going overseas for work,
Hmm.
um, because there's so much poverty at home. So you find pockets of Irish all over the globe.
Yeah.
That really helps. That Irish diaspora helps. But as a result of that very outward looking world view, we're kind of able to get on. So I'll give you an example, which is a regular example that happens all the time with me. One minute I could be standing in a field with a local pig farmer or a shepherd or a guy that farms blueberries in Maine in the morning, trudging through mud on a freezing winter's morning. And then later on, I'm meeting a local Passamaquoddy tribe Indian chief, working with the local First Nations. And that evening, I could be having dinner with the in the governor's office or the governor's house, right? So, and then you're off to Washington the next morning to meet senator for a state. Being able to operate at every single level, whether it's the guy, a crew that are installing solar panels for you, whether it's a governor or an energy or a minister, being able to switch between one and the other seamlessly is a huge advantage. And I think the Irish have that. It's easy for us. Maybe it's the storytelling piece. I don't know. But that helps. But the culture is like the US is radically different to Italy or Romania, like you said. You've got to be able to pivot and you've got to be able to change your approach every time and have some sense of what appeals to the fella across the table from you or the woman across the table. And if you can get into that psyche a little bit, what's going to work for them, and what's not going to work for them, even more importantly. And that enables you to do deals where others may struggle, is understanding where the other side is coming from and understanding those cultural differences and just embracing them and
I mean,
run with
it's pretty central to being able to negotiate in those situations, isn't
it. It
it?
is.
Let me ask you, I'm going to ask you about what you've learned from the experience. What's been your biggest mistake? And what did you learn from it?
Funny enough, probably trust. So, but yet that's been the biggest strength. So the biggest mistake is a handshake, agreeing a deal, and then being left out to dry. And that's happened on occasion. And that's cost, real money, and it's cost us quite a bit. But by the same token, that same handshake has got us deals that we wouldn't have been able to get as well. So it unlocks opportunity, but it also can land you in it. So I think it's probably is that judgment call and trust. For me, it's really important, and it's got us a long way. But we fall foul of that trust too on occasion, and you have a deal in place, but somebody will just rip it up. You take something on trust. When it comes to crunch, you could be left out to dry. That's happened on a couple of occasions in the US and in China, and less so in Europe. Europe are more long-term thinkers. They're kind of long-term strategists a little bit more. Again, this comes down to the cultural thing, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, you're very successful now. I mean, what would you attribute that success to? I mean, is it your ability to build trust with partners? I mean, what would you attribute your success to? Because
I
you're
think
working in a really difficult market, I think.
Yeah, I think the partnership piece is really a big piece, to be honest, to be able to do deals and identify where you're going to need that help and work with somebody locally. That's really fundamental to doing business overseas. You can't go it alone. You just can't, or you will lose your shirt. Or if you're investing somebody else's money, you'll lose their shirt. So I think that's really important. I think the other thing is absolute tenacity, Paul. Like not giving up ever and not taking no. I mean, if you really, really believe in something and you've done the analysis, and it comes back to those fundamentals. If you really believe in them and you've got that vision, you've just got to follow it through, and it's relentless. And it's just being consistently there and constantly going, constantly, and you get knocked back, go again, knock back, go again, and you keep getting further along.
Yeah.
But it's I would say tenacity, persistence, consistency, and constantly fighting,
I
believing
love
in
the
that vision.
I love the Churchill quote. He apparently said, success is being able to go from one failure to another with no loss of enthusiasm. And it's always struck me as very pertinent.
It is, it totally is. Somebody said something to me recently. Actually, it was somebody, actor, being interviewed. And, he said, if you try and you succeed, what the hell do you do then? It's interesting.
Yeah,
Some businesses I've seen, right place, right time, first go, bang, huge success, and then massive failure, like on a huge scale. And I think if everything it runs smoothly from day one, you don't build the resilience
yeah,
in to see the bad stuff coming and be able to pivot and be able to be agile and mitigate against what may go wrong. I think if you've got a few knockdowns along the way, you just this resilience builds into the system, to the business, to the individuals, and the individuals develop grit
yeah. Yeah, and
and
you
apply.
only learn that. You only learn about dealing with failure by having failures, don't you? You can't learn it from a PowerPoint presentation. It doesn't
No,
work.
you can't. And people talk about it, but Paul, I worry about it because in today's, I see young people coming out of college.
Mm.
They've never been told you failed an exam. You've got, could do better or room for improvement. It's all soft messaging. Everybody gets a medal at sports day. Well, my day, three people got medal at sports day. There was number one got gold, number two, who was first loser, got silver, and bronze for third, and the rest of you really lost, right? So either you got to try something else, or you got to work a lot harder,
Yeah.
or you got to find an edge. But people don't fail. The kids are brought up being told they're great the whole time. And I think we're sucking resilience out of them. They're not they're not, falling out of trees, scuffing their knees to the same extent they used to. They're on a screen the whole time. And I worry that we are raising a new generation of kids going into the workplace that are very soft and they are not equipped to
Mm.
deal with real
I mean,
failure.
I'm not going to comment on parenting because I don't have kids, but I mean, I think your point is well made because business inevitably involves failure, doesn't it? Things go wrong, stuff has to be rethought. We need to find,
Yeah,
I mean, you've talked on numerous, you mentioned the word pivot on about 10 occasions. I mean, that's a fact of business, isn't it? And if
yeah.
you can't deal with that, that's going to be a real problem. And I can see your concerns about the future. Let me ask you just to follow up on that point. I mean, you've talked a lot about where you've got to now. I mean, how do you see your business and your sector evolving going forward? I mean, for example, in lots of other sectors, lots of other CEOs have talked to you, sort of getting anxious about the impact that AI is going to have. Is AI going to impact on your sector? And presumably it will have an impact on
Hugely.
yeah. So tell us about that. I mean, how's that going to change things, do you think?
So I think it's really, really exciting, Paul. So I'll paint you a vision of the future, right, in this space, right? And when you look at blockchain, when you look at machine learning and AI, when you look at the Internet of Things, when you look at market reform and policy, when you look at the democratization of energy consumption and production, couple that with the hardware technology. So you got software and hardware. And you look at sort of nanotechnology. So you can your phones, your every surface will be dipped in a photosynthetic dye that will effectively generate power, right, from light.
Hmm.
And today at solar panels, like we have energy efficiency about 22% maybe, right? So we convert a photon into an electron and we're able to capture 20% of that photon energy and convert it into an electron that we can use, right? In nature converts through photosynthesis, not photovoltaics, but photosynthesis, converts through chemical reaction, converts a photon, unit of energy in light, into calorific value at a rate of about 5%. So the technology is 4 times more efficient than nature at the moment, right? And it's totally scalable. So what we'll have is we will have solar panels on our roofs of our house, solar paint on the walls, and integrated and everything. We'll have battery storage that's getting so efficient, it's incredible. We'll have an EV, battery in that, and we'll have forecasting, AI that'll forecast. Well, actually, what happened was last time we got an anticyclone coming across the Atlantic. 3 days later, when it hit, energy prices dropped to this price. This is how the market reacted, and we've got 20 years of data to analyze that. Um, we'll be able to predict with huge accuracy what electricity pricing is going to do as demand comes on the grid and off the grid and more generation is ramped up or falls away. And we'll have a little bit of software and a black box in our home that will say, I know the way Paul behaves. I know what time he gets up in the morning. I know how far he's going to drive to work. I know what he's going to consume in electricity. I know he's going to put a wash on a Wednesday evening. I know it's going to know your consumption patterns and be able to predict how much electricity you're going to consume. But it'll also then look at predict the electricity prices, and it's going to do forward trades for you as because you'll be consuming electricity, you'll be storing electricity, you'll draw it off the grid, you'll set it back onto the grid. You won't even know you're doing it. It'll all be done with a little bit of software. And at the end of the week, a little app will tell you how much money you've made off your electricity. And it's all going to happen. You are going to be trading power in your sleep. And it's all going to be interconnected, and it's going to put the hot water on when it needs to be on, and it's going to divert electricity to your EV so it'll charge your EV up because it can see from your diary that you're going to be driving to, I don't know, Edinburgh tomorrow. All of this is just going to happen, and AI is going to improve it, and constantly improve. So I think that's very exciting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you painted a really interesting picture there. And I hope, I mean, I don't think many people really understand the way things are changing and the rate that they're changing at either. So, I mean, I'm like you, I tend to feel it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I think it's huge opportunity. There's a lot of fear of AI, and I think there's genuinely, there's a race very much. If you look at AI and you look at the future, it's the US and China. And China can very centrally control the direction of travel and the investment in AI. As for the US, it's all private corporations and it's very little regulation away you go. Europe is over-regulated and we can't get out of our own way. So we'll be the losers in terms of owning that IP, in terms of AI and that language. And that's a concern. By the same token, it's so powerful that there needs to be some sort of guardrails, and the state does need, I think, and I'm generally, let the market do what the market's going to do, and the less regulation, the better. This is a scenario where I think there needs to be some regulation and guidelines out because AI, in terms of being able to create that super intelligence, there's no question it's a matter of time, and in the hands of rogue actors or rogue
Big
state,
risks, aren't there?
there's big risks to it.
Sure, sure.
Definitely.
David, thank you for taking a bit of time out to talk us
No
through that.
problem.
I think I agree with you in the sense that whichever way things shake down, it's going to be an interesting few years. So it was really good to hear such a positive view about the future, and I hope it shakes down that way. So thank you for making time to come and have a chat with us, and with a bit of luck, we'll catch up again soon.
Pleasure, Paul. We'll talk again soon. Thanks very
Cheers,
much.
cheers, David. Bye bye.
Okay. Bye now.